Welcome to At Issue. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is H. Wayne Wilson, and there are a couple of other names that will probably ring a bell to you, and that would be the name of Freddie Gray or Michael Brown. Michael Brown, of course, in Ferguson, Missouri, Freddie Gray, Baltimore. And we can look at other communities across America where troubles have arisen with regard to police-community relations. And we're going to talk about changes in policing and how police are reacting and what their duties really are with the chiefs of police for Normal and Peoria. First, let me introduce the chief of police in Normal. That is Rick Bleichner. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
And his counterpart in Peoria is Jerry Mitchell. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And both have been, you're about 25 years on the force?
Correct.
And about pushing 24.
Right.
And 4 years as chief, and
not quite a year.
Not quite a year.
Right.
Okay. And number of hours that you're putting in has increased?
That it has.
You already are familiar with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's talk just in real broad scope. The police departments, in my estimation, have a difficult task because they have to balance civil rights of citizens versus protecting those same citizens. How do you go about, just in general, how do you go about balancing that?
Well, I think you have to balance that day to day. I think you take the experiences and those interactions of what happened today, and then you have to do a review, not only just a custodial review of in-house policy, but you also have to bring other people to the table. You have to bring legal from your city, and you review the policies, and that's how you get a better practice. So it's kind of a combination of things when you look at those on the street, and you have to understand what the people's rights are, but you have to balance it what the needs of the community are and what the law is as well.
I would say it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. I mean, for us, we certainly look at that as Chief Mitchell has said. I mean, it's very important. You want to develop a sound policy, and a lot of times that sound policy is based on, the Constitution at root, but then also it's ever-changing every day because there are case law out there. There are new decisions that are being made that impact your operations and how you police. And so I think we have to be on top of that. But then the other part of it is, you have to be sincere about it, but you have to get input from the community about issues and concerns that they have, because again, what may work very effectively in Peoria may not work in Normal. And so I think you have to take those best practices, and you also have to listen to what fits your needs in the community for policing in your area.
And further, what may work in North Peoria may not work in the Valley of Peoria.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Baltimore, Ferguson, Waco, Texas, most recently, other communities we can cite. Have you changed your procedures because of that in any way, shape, or form?
I would say for us, we have, prior to those things happening, I mean, we did a lot of community outreach. We had a lot of different programs that we put on in Normal, and we try again to get that community input, and understanding that there can be tensions in every community, and there can be just one particular incident that sparks something like that. I think you can never take for granted the type of relations you have within your community, and you always got to be working towards that. And so, I think, again, for us, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and for years we've been trying to work with the community, work with different organizations and groups to see not only what their needs are, but also to educate them about how we do certain things and why we do those things. And I said, so I think that helps because, with the Ferguson situation, the time to develop that relationship isn't at 1 o'clock in the morning when people are throwing rocks and bottles at you and they're wanting to light things on fire and burn businesses. You have to have had those discussions long beforehand. And again, you can never take for granted that all the work you've done is going to prevent something like that. I think that just lays the groundwork in making sure that when tensions happen or when situations arise, you have a framework in place in which you can reach out and contact those people, those organizations, those community leaders, bring them to the table so that they can have input, they can hear from the police department, or they can hear from other individuals what the concerns are and then how they were handled. And I think having something like that in place helps people understand that there is a procedure and that we're not just hiding behind the doors of the police department and saying we're not going to tell you anything.
And we'll talk about some of those techniques in just a moment, but I want to hear from Chief Mitchell with regard to Baltimore, Ferguson, et cetera. Any changes in general in the Peoria Police Department in terms of operation?
No, it's the work still needs to be done, and as Rick had mentioned, you're doing more community service oriented type activities, but our department, as like normal, we're already doing those things. We're out there every day, and you make sure you make those connections with the not only the neighborhood, but the neighborhood associations, and then reach out to the faith-based folks in those communities as well. So you have to do, it's the due diligence is what you still do. Ferguson and Baltimore and Waco, they bring awareness to your department, to your city. And then in the reality is you have to review what you do so you don't put yourself in a position very similar to that. So it's business as usual for us in our community. We just continue to do better, not more.
In terms of reaching out, the day that we taped this program, you had a chance to visit some third graders, was it?
Yes.
And why are you doing that? That's not policing, is it?
It's well, me, it's twofold. It is good policing. It's connecting with our youth, whether or not they're at risk or not. It's developing those relationships, and sometimes the kids in our community, particularly the ones at risk, the only time they see the officers are in times of trouble. So they only have a one perspective of why the officer's there. And typically it's not the interaction that we want. So we have to make sure that we're out there on a day-to-day basis on doing the activities that we want them to see us do.
Some of the organizations that exist in the two communities, let's address that. MAPP, M-A-P-P, that's Minority and Police Partnership.
Correct.
Can you explain how that's benefiting the police department and benefiting the community?
Sure. I think early on, MAPP was formed in 2004, and really it was formed out of, I guess, a mistrust between law enforcement and some within the minority community, that even be organizations of leadership, whether it be the NAACP and such. And I think what happened then was there was an opportunity, or we saw an opportunity where we could do a better job than we were. And what happened was that then created a situation. Initially, we sat down and discussed how citizen complaints were handled and the process for handling those citizen complaints. And we talked through some issues because there was a lot of concern that someone may voice a concern, but what happens after that, and what is getting done, and what is the process? And so out of those discussions, we decided, you know what, if we can sit down and come up with, or refine our processes, cause us to look internally and say, hey, what's some ways in which we could do better? But also, what are ways we can inform the public? Because in law enforcement, there are times we assume that other people know this because we live it every day and we go through it every day. But what we realized is, we could really do a better job of teaching and telling and explaining what we do. And so out of that came an opportunity. If we can sit down and collaborate on something on this particular one issue, we should be able to sit down and have a regular dialogue about other issues that are important to the community and law enforcement. And so we did, and that kicked off several other things. We had, community meetings where we could get together. We could talk about issues like traffic stops, and we could talk about things like tasers and use of force and just police contacts and how to handle yourself during a police contact, and then what are citizens' rights during those types of contacts. And so it even got to the point we put together some what we called them stop cards. And basically, we handed them out, and they were in English and they were in Spanish, and they basically walked through what typically occurred on a standard traffic stop, what individuals' rights were, and then more importantly, how they should conduct themselves in an interaction with law enforcement. And so those are some things that we've had since then. And again, I think that is critical, going back to the previous point. What it did is it established a framework for us to get to know individuals within the community, within the organizations, and who are the leaders in those organizations. And then what happens is when we have something that comes up, we can reach out to them. I know them, I have their phone number, I have their email. I have regular contact again with the president of the NAACP, our local branch, with the local McLean County Indian Association and other groups. I think when things come up or there's questions or there's issues, they call us and we call them, and we try and take care of them when they're small rather than waiting for them to balloon and become major issues.
And the police department is an active participant in this organization.
We are.
Whereas in Peoria, there's a structure. It's not exactly the same as MAP, and it's called PCAV, Peoria Citizens Against Violence. The police department isn't an active participant in that, or are you?
We partner from behind. So we support their initiatives, we support their functions, we support their events throughout the community, and we have a presence there. But it is not a police department-led initiative. And the point behind that is the police department may respond through law enforcement, and we can stop a problem today. But the permanent solution, the long-term solution, is the community itself. So it not only is a voice, but it is a rally point for everybody in the community to get involved, stay involved, and take back particular neighborhoods that they so desire to take back.
In both cases, MAP and PCAV, you're talking to what I will use the term community leaders of some type. Is that filtering down to the general population?
I think with PCAV and P-Town Soup, I think it's slowly reaching out, it's spreading out. And I think the more often they do their events and they have community picnics and they do different outreaches, I think the better off they'll be served.
And likewise, you think it's reaching down?
I think it is, because again, in our community in Bloomington Normal, the individuals that sit on the Minority and Police Partnership and come to that meeting, they wear their hats within the community. Again, whether it's within their own organizations, their the faith-based groups or such. And so again, I get a lot of calls with questions that probably we wouldn't have gotten before, and I think that's certainly the word is spreading. It may have gotten to the point where somebody had a complaint and they showed up at the department, but now, we're seeing fewer complaints, we're seeing more calls with questions about things, and so I think it gives us an opportunity to sit down and then kind of look at things objectively and be more informative, and again, on the front end. So I think that information is being shared, and again, I think that's kind of key, because again, good press is good press, but when you have bad press, it takes a lot longer to recover from that, and most of the time, that's word of mouth. And so I think that informing those people that are at the table for MAP and sharing with them why we do what we do and the practices in place, they're much more informed to go out and spread good information about the police department rather than misinformation.
Chief Mitchell, you mentioned P-Town Soup. We probably should address that, because that really is reaching out to the individuals.
It is. It is. That's a program that was adopted from another state, and it is a citizen-based, community-based program. It's an initiative that if it's held at a church or a social agency, I think they've done them here in town at the Friendship House is one place they've done it at. And what they do is the community is invited to come in and hear different presentations on how the particular individual thinks that they may impact the community if the community itself supports them. So how it works is when individuals show up, they purchase a ticket to come in. That ticket allows them to vote on an area or for a presenter that they feel is best deserving of the money. And it's a winner-take-all. And that individual who receives the most votes will then receive the money for the night, and then part of their obligation is to come back at the next meeting and to explain to the community exactly what they spent the money on. So we've seen that anywhere from youth baseball and basketball programs to GED programs. So it's been a kind of wide range of different initiatives, and so far it's been successful.
And you have Coffee with a Cop?
Yeah, that's one of the things over in Bloomington Normal. I said we actually, as with most good ideas, we borrowed it from Illinois State University Police that had been doing it through their campus dining for a couple of years. And what we did with other area law enforcement, including the state's attorney's office, was we thought it was a good opportunity to go out and be more accessible to the community and allow people to come in and see us. And so we've had 2 events. One of them was in Bloomington, the last one was in Normal, and they've both been very well attended.
And I should mention that we invited Chief Hefner from Bloomington to join us, but between vacation and training, he was unable to join the other two chiefs, so we'll catch up with him later. So, let me talk to you a little bit about this program. Is it called Respect that Officers Duncan and Watkins handle? Is that called Respect?
Correct.
And now that's reaching out at a very young age.
It is. It's designed to reach out to school-age children, particularly high school. And the initiative behind it is the officers respond to the different schools. We have 5 officers assigned to the 4 high schools throughout Peoria now on a daily basis. So they're interacting with the kids every day. So it makes sense to really drive down and get an opportunity and seize that opportunity to speak with these kids and find out how our relationship is with them and where we're missing with them. So part of that initiative of Respect, the Peoria Respect, is that they sit down with the officers and they get to know them on an individual basis. But further that, they get to know what the expectations are from both the officer and as a 15-year-old on the street, what his rights are and what the officers are thinking and what their expectations are. So it's a valuable program. It's been referred to locally here as Comply Now, Complain Later. So basically saying, do what the officer's telling you if it's a lawful order. And then there's a mechanism in place, and we tell them how they can reach out if they felt like they weren't treated with respect or they were treated poorly. There is a mechanism in place through the complaint process of how to reach out.
And that presents one of the problems, is that if you get someone who wants to complain now during the stop, that puts the officer in a position of, how do I deal with this individual? What is the problem here? Is there any training or is there a guideline for officers to what do we do now?
Well, I know for us, I mean, for example, it's always going to be officer safety and public safety. So if there's a situation in which an individual needs to be taken into custody and it needs to be done expeditiously, they're going to do that in the appropriate manner. And so, again, it's not always the time to argue that or question that when you're being told, turn around, put your hands behind your back, you're under arrest or whatever. What happens then is we kind of use a similar program where we talk about the comply and complain. We say comply, and then when the time's appropriate, question, because the officer should always be able to explain to you, under state law and under our policy, why you're being arrested. So I need you to turn around, put your hands behind your back, comply. Officer, why am I being arrested? What happened? They can explain it to them, and then they can question further and say, well, yeah, but I didn't do that, or that wasn't me, or whatever. And then at the end of that particular situation, if they're not happy, then yes, they certainly have the opportunity to complain. If it's on the street at the time, the officer can request, that a supervisor come over and talk with that individual. And the supervisor then would make a determination on, here's the best appropriate way to handle it. Sometimes it's not always on the street. Sometimes we may have to take it, and if the individual is in custody, we may have to send a supervisor down to follow up with that person on the next day, or they may say, I don't want to talk to you now, I'm going to come in at a later time, and they can certainly do that too.
Is there an issue with the way an officer conducts a particular stop? For instance, a traffic stop for not signaling or what have you, versus what we might call an investigatory stop, where there is reason to believe something's going on? And does the officer take a different tact in terms of how they question the person they have stopped in an investigatory stop versus a traffic stop?
Well, for us, there may be a different, and again, there may be an end result or something that you're looking to do. For example, if you're making an individual, or you're stopping a vehicle for speeding, or you're stopping them because they didn't signal a turn, your investigation's pretty straightforward. You're stopping the individual, you're notifying them of why they're doing that. If you're stopping somebody because you allege some potentially illegal activity, you're following up on something else, then that investigation's probably going to take a little bit different line of questioning, but it doesn't mean that the officer's conduct still should be the same. They should be professional, they should be courteous, they should be able to answer your questions throughout the stop. Just because one of them is an investigatory stop and one of them is a regular traffic stop based on a violation of the vehicle code, their conduct really and how they interact with the citizen should be very similar.
In Peoria, do you have the same technique? Is that do you take a different tact under different situations? Do you bring in a dog at a certain point? Do you bring in backup? And does that change the way the person who was stopped reacts?
It can, and if I could back up, yeah, the officer has to use their discretion. They have to use it based upon their knowledge and experience of what they're handling will determine their course of action. But the expectation's the same. Every citizen contact, we expect the same thing. But if they are in need of something further, and it's a supervisor or a canine, that may extend that stop, but there is a fine line. There's a fine line of how long is too long. So we constantly have to make sure that we're in compliance with that as well.
This week, the Obama administration put out a list of federal surplus weaponry that would no longer, that you can no longer use federal funds to purchase, and restrictions on others. Does the town of Normal and likewise the city of Peoria have any of those types of military weapons, vehicles that you have purchased in the past? Are you going to change your purchasing techniques?
It would not impact us. I mean, we have some equipment that we would consider that we utilize for special circumstances, our emergency response unit, which is a SWAT team. We also have a hostage negotiation team where we have certain specialized equipment that we utilize for that, but none of that was purchased or military surplus. We're pretty fortunate in that we've had, been able to justify and get the things that we need for those units through our regular budgeting process. And so we have not had to take advantage of any of the military surplus to this point.
And likewise in Peoria, any military gear purchased from the federal government?
Not in regards to vehicles and such of that nature, but in the past, the department has replaced items that we had purchased through our own means, but nothing to the extent of where you're seeing the larger vehicles. We do have agreements in place with Peoria County, who does have a larger vehicle that we could use, and we've had used in the past in hostage situations and things like that.
With regard to crowd control in particular, we saw it in Ferguson, Baltimore. Do you have procedures in place for those kinds of demonstrations? And how do you handle when the crowd is 5 times the size of the police force?
Well, we do. We do have contingency plans, and specifically, we have the obligation to protect infrastructure here in the city. So, part of that plan is to identify what needs protected, if it needs protected at all. So, we do have mechanisms in place, and recently, all 222 officers of our department has received specific training in crowd control.
And likewise, you have crowd control techniques?
Yeah, we do. And I mean, we're in a similar situation in that we do have certain infrastructure that we need to protect also. And we know in developing our plans that, depending on where there might be some crowd issues, will determine on how we guide those particular crowds. But we also have, with Illinois State University, 20,000 plus students in our community. We've had some experiences over, the last several years with different celebratory type gatherings, whether it's the White Sox winning the World Series or, the Cubs making the playoffs, if they do that.
So you don't have to
and
worry
I'm a
about that.
lifelong Cub fan, so if it's May and they're not mathematically eliminated, it's a good year.
Okay, good.
So for us, we typically, though, we have had some experience in doing that, and likewise, we have annual training where we have individuals that are designated as the in charge squad leaders, if you will, and they conduct annual training with everybody in their squad, which encompasses the whole police department. And we do that annually. We go through that, and then again, we revisit our plans and look at things.
A brief final thought from you, Chief Mitchell. Body cameras. A lot of people think that's the panacea. That will solve the issue of what actually happened during that police stop. Body camera, it's there. Have you looked at body cameras in the Peoria Police Department?
We have, and I think the big misconception is that most people think that the body camera is a fix-all type event. I think people expect that an officer, the minute he laces his boots to leave in the morning to the time he comes home and takes them off, that everything he does will be captured by a body camera, and that is not the case. The reality is it's very limited use, but it is a useful tool. And I don't think it's a matter of if, it's a matter of when that the Peoria Police Department will get those.
Any drawbacks to body cameras?
Well, there's an expense. We know that
Upfront expense, but-
upfront cost, and then there's the back end. There's the storing of the information, and then the redacting of video that may be necessary upon Freedom of Information requests that we receive on a daily basis. So there is a cost. There's a true cost that we haven't been able to measure quite yet.
And with that, we'll have to continue the conversation off camera. We hope you continue your conversation at home. Thank you to Chief Rick Bleichner of the Normal Police Department, Chief Jerry Mitchell of the Peoria Police Department. We thank you both for the conversation and updating us in the aftermath of some of the plain simple riots that took place in Baltimore and Ferguson. We'll be back next week with another edition of At Issue. Please join us for a visit with Tom McIntyre and Bob Larson, retirees from Channel 31 and Channel 25. I'm not sure I'll have full control over that program, but please join us for a healthy conversation with Mac and Bob on the next At Issue.